It's 4 p.m. Stand up. It's count time. It's time for every man and woman to stand up and be counted. I'm Brother L.D. Azobra, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Count Time Podcast. We got some special shows here this month. We got a lot to share, and we want you to be a part of it, and we don't want you to miss any of these shows. So please take your time and scroll down right now and hit the subscribe button. That way you can catch each show each week throughout this month and the months to come. Also, please like and share Count Time to all your friends and loved ones. Thank you once again, and we're looking forward to you joining in each week into Count Time.
Hello, I am Dr. Joyce Marie Jackson, Chair of the Department of Geography and Anthropology at Louisiana State University. So we would really like to thank Count Time and LD Azobra, as well as Cultural Crossroads, for giving us this opportunity to just feature some of our speakers so that others can hear them that did not attend the conference. As we enter Women's History Month, we are sort of rolling off the back of Black History Month, and there were many wonderful programs that took place all around the country, which is something that, we really celebrate 365 days of the year, but we just kind of focus more on it during the month of February. Well, during the month of February, we also had this conference called Navigating the Storms of Slavery, Reflect, Restore, and Reclaim. And this conference was held at the LSU Alumni Center at Louisiana State University. And it was co-sponsored by the Department of Geography and Anthropology, which I am the chair of the department and also the coordinator of the conference. And our co-host was the Southern University Law Center, where John Pierre is the chancellor. During the conference, there were a number of very impactful keynote speakers and panelists. And since this is Women's History Month, we would like to feature a few of those speakers on the program. We're starting with Dr. Ruth Simmons. Dr. Ruth Simmons is a remarkable individual whose journey from being a sharecropper's daughter from Texas to becoming the president of 3 prestigious universities. Her story is nothing short of being extraordinary. Hailing from humble beginnings, her path to success is a testament to her resilience and commitment to education. Dr. Simmons has left an indelible mark on academia, and having served as the president of Brown University and Prairie University, hailing from those humble beginnings, she's really a testament to her resilience and commitment to education. She currently holds a pivotal role at Harvard University, where she is a special assistant to the president, and she works with the collaboration with historically Black colleges and universities, and show that she's still paving the way for academic excellence in higher education and looking at underrepresented communities in higher education. She holds also the role of a presidential scholar at Rice University. Her journey embodies the spirit of breaking barriers, overcoming challenges, and championing education as a means of empowerment. And her story serves as an inspiration to all. She was definitely an inspiration to me and those of us who were listening to her at the conference. And she illustrated a transformative power of determination and the pursuit of knowledge. And she just published her memoirs, which is called Up Home, One Girl's Journey. Please check it out. Okay, upcoming we have Dr. Miriam Fisher Girlando. She will be our next speaker, and she's an associate professor, a retired associate professor at Grambling State University. And she will be speaking on what we call double jeopardy, enslaved and incarcerated women in the state of Louisiana historically. Monique Verdin. Monique is, she gave us really a very insightful talk on her community, which is the Houma Nation, And she's talked about the environment, how they are losing their homes because of erosion, coastal erosion. She also talked about health issues as well as the educational system and its impact on the Homer community. And so she's also produced a film called Louisiana, My Love. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy Dr. Ruth Simmons.
It's just really a pleasure to introduce her. She was born in East Texas, where my family is from, and was enslaved there in Cushing, Texas. And I'm just going to give her as much time as she needs. And so we'll bring her up. I ask that you thank her for being here. Dr. Ruth Simmons.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I apologize. One of the things you might know about presidents is that we hew to a very strict schedule. And so I have to leave anticipating that I would be on from 10 o'clock. So I discussed briefly with Dr. Jackson what I should do, and I'll try to say as much as I can to say, but it will be truncated, which is not bad. First of all, I have to say it's a great privilege for me to be here and to have heard the last presentation because, honestly, I started this project over 20 years ago at Brown. I dreamed that there would be this unfettered investigation of this subject. That this would become so permissible and so safe to do, that scholars would grow up to do this important work, and finally, the story would be told about the history of this country. That was a dream at the time, but it was a perilous dream. So I thought what I'd do is tell you a little bit about how all of this started, and tell you from the vantage point of the leadership that is going to be required going forward if you are to be safe in this work. And that's a big if, in my view. So, when I first was named president of Brown, people thought, well, isn't that nice? Finally, a black person has become president of an Ivy League university. But then, in the environment at the time, there was this question posed by brave people like Charles Ogletree of whether or not Ivy League institutions ought to be sued for having benefited from the slave trade. And naturally, people came to me and said, well, gee, they're talking about this. Is it true that Brown benefited from the slave trade? I went to every source I could find to learn about what had transpired in the founding of the university. And as you might imagine, there was absolute silence on this issue in every document that I could find that was a public document. So I went to everybody in the university and said, what is this history? They said, well, that's a lie. It's not true. There's no connection whatsoever. And then I went to the written history of the university, and I looked for some information. There was nothing there, which is quite an extraordinary tale in itself. And so I thought, well, what am I to do? So the conventional wisdom was, listen, you're black. Do not touch this at all, because if you do, there will never be another black president of a university like this. Some of my best friends, in fact, scholars of African American studies, told me that, Nellie McKay called me up from Wisconsin and said, "Girl, have you lost your mind?" I still love her. She's great. And so I decided that there was an inherent conflict in everything that I was hearing. Because here I was, leader of an enterprise that avowed its commitment to truth. Very inconvenient. And so to lead an institution that was dedicated to the pursuit of truth, and then to be complicit in lying about the institution itself, just seemed to me something that could not stand. And so I decided that I would commission a group to investigate the history of the university. And that group was led by a Southern historian, Jim Campbell, and Tony Bogues from African American Studies. And to say that it was controversial at the time is certainly an understatement. I had been president of Smith before I joined Brown, but I recognized soon after we announced this study that I was in a different world, because that's when they had to assign police to guard my house every night. And that's when people showed up from around the country to come and tell me what's what about what we were doing. So the question, again, turning back to leadership, the question became, well, how can we do this important work and still not hamper in any way the university, which of course I was committed to serving in the broadest sense. And so my idea was that I would separate the study from my office and leave it to the scholars, and then protect them and their ability to do this work. Then my job was to communicate about it in a way that people could come to understand. And that's one of the biggest problems we have in this work today, is that as adherents of doing the right thing, learning how to communicate about it so that we can protect the ability of people to do the work in the future, that's one of the most important things that we have the obligation to do in my view. And so I talked about the trust that we are privileged to have as universities. There are people who come to universities believing that we do the work that we do with a high level of integrity. Otherwise, they can't trust the scholarship that we do. They can't trust the teaching that we do if they don't believe that. So I explained to the community there's no way for Brown to fail to tell the truth about itself and to retain the trust of the community that it serves. And that's vital in the work that we do. Why do we do it? Because it is right and just to do, and because we serve the world. And in our work, if we are corrupt, if we fail to do what is right, then we undermine our mission. And in fact, in the end, we undermine the ability of people to believe in what we do. Now, I think you all know that today, the trust factor for universities is sinking. And I think you know that the trust factor for many institutions is wanting today. And so I come back to the question of how we lead in this work. And that's what I've spent a lot of my time thinking about, and that's what I basically have tried to do over the span of my career, is to try to hold some kind of light to leadership doing its job to protect the work that needs to be done by universities. So, the commission at Brown did its work, and they made a series of recommendations, some of which were implemented and some of which were not. But we had the good luck of having a plentiful source of material that told the story for us, in essence. Here's the thing. John Brown was an infamous slave trader. And he also loved Brown and helped to found the university. And of course, what did he do? Because he loved the university so much, he left all kinds of artifacts to the university. And so there is, if those of you who do this work probably have been to the John Brown Library. And in the John Brown Library, John Carter Brown Library at Brown, there are wonderful records. Wonderful in the sense that there are logs of slave ships detailing the horrendous trade in which the Brown family engaged. So our first task when we started doing that work to a very skeptical public, because at the time the media were very focused on this and the error of our ways, we started with an exhibition. And we had the leg irons, and we had the logs, the ship logs. And we had evidence of all the objects on campus that belonged on slave ships. And then we explored Rhode Island and Providence was the center of shipbuilding for the slave trade. And we pointed out that if you had wealth and if you were an investor of that era and you lived there, you were involved in some way in the transatlantic slave trade. Pervasive in the area. And by the time that exhibition was over and had been reported on, the questions subsided about why we were doing the work. Ultimately, we wanted to do this for Brown. We did not anticipate that it would take hold and that hundreds of institutions thereafter would follow. We didn't have any idea of the import of what we were doing. We were doing it selfishly to maintain our credibility as an institution. But as soon as it became clear that this movement was sweeping across the world, we were called into action to help others who were trying to do the same work. And I think we were able to give cover to other institutions that could now do the work without boards, without alumni, without others calling them to account for daring to ask these difficult questions. So that's the origin of what we were doing at Brown, and what we were innocently thinking would just be a study that we did for our own institution that turned out to be something very different. I'm always amazed to think that of all the work that I've done across 3 institutions, the one thing people know about me is starting this business of slavery. I don't believe that that is the singular thing that I've done, but I think its import is undeniable. I also think it's not nearly over. And I caution all of you to be very mindful of the fact that there are people who are coming after this work. Be mindful of the fact that you could, in your own work, lay the groundwork for them to be successful in curtailing this work. And I always admonish that we have to be mindful of the fact that we are telling very uncomfortable truths. And more importantly, we're coming after people's pockets. And there's nothing worse you can do in this country of ours than to do that. I don't know if you mentioned this, but I'm both at Rice, but I'm also advisor to the president of Harvard. And I'll tell you how that happened, more or less. 20 years after we did this work at, are you thinking I need to sit down? Is it something I'm doing? Yeah, I get treated like that all the time. She's not going to be able to keep standing. I mean, bring this chair up here. So Harvard undertook its own truth and transformation study a couple of years ago, and brought that study all the way through to completion, along with a series of recommendations of what they thought would be appropriate to do. During the time they were doing the study, I was asked to do the commencement speech at Harvard. And here I want to exhort to everybody who has a platform to take the opportunity of that platform to integrate into it the things that need to be told that may otherwise not get said. And so, as I thought about giving the commencement speech, and I give scores of commencement speeches, so I was thinking, well, what should I say? The first thing I wanted to say to the students graduating is that they would not earn their laurels just by going to Harvard and graduating. They would only earn them when and if they had engaged in the struggle for justice, caring about people who have been left out or who have been violated in some regard. But I also wanted to say to Harvard, you have benefited over centuries from the accumulation of wealth as a consequence of the wealth that started this university. And so just as that wealth over time has grown by virtue of your investments, making you the wealthiest institution in the country, by contrast, those universities founded to make a way for blacks who were denied freedom and opportunities have had their poverty compounded similarly over their entire existence. And what I said in my commencement speech was, you have an obligation to those institutions. And so, as a consequence of that, they wrote into their recommendations following their slavery study that they would engage with HBCUs and find ways to invest substantially in those institutions. And naturally, because I opened my mouth and said they should, they came to me and said, okay, we're going to do it, and now you must come and advise us about how to do that. But my point is, every opportunity that we have in a leadership role to emphasize, whether true or not, the obligation to love justice, to take care of those who are left outside the mainstream, to be a source of hope to young people going forward. That's a part of what we have to do all the time, but we have to say it in ways that allow people to adopt it, and often we don't do that. Okay? And so if our intent is to make people feel guilty about the fact that they have benefited from slavery in some way, then we can expect we're not going to have very much luck winning more people to this fight. But there are ways to talk about this, as I think we heard from the previous speaker, that allow us to bring people into this fight and not to push people away. I've learned something very, but it is very much in the way that we frame this and the way we talk about it. I learned something very important recently. I have a book and I'm on a book tour. And talking about my life in East Texas and the racism that was so prevalent when I grew up. My parents were sharecroppers, and they had a very difficult life, obviously. And I talk about that life in my book. And then I've been contacted by people who were part of that system. In particular, the owners of the sharecroppers farm where my family worked, and my sisters and brothers are appalled that they would have the nerve to contact me and want to meet with me. I don't feel that way at all. The fact that they want to talk about that era and talk about what their family did and how they treated black sharecroppers, to me is an opening. And I'm going to do it, whether my sisters and brothers think it's something I should do or not. Similarly, I've been contacted by whites in the town where I grew up, wanting to meet with me. And again, my older sisters and brothers say, "Oh my God, how awful." I don't think so. If in this country we do not have the capacity to talk across difference, then we're of course doomed as a country. We're doomed as a world if we don't have the capacity to do that. Everybody in this room has an obligation to play the role of interlocutor to people who disagree with us. Everybody. And if we decline that obligation, we're handing over to people the ability to suppress further in the future the beautiful stories now that are coming to light. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, what we're learning. All the scholarship that has ensued since we started our study about slavery in this country and in other parts of the world. Imagine, this is just the beginning of what we will ultimately know about the path of people who were enslaved and brought to this part of the world, and other parts of the world for that matter. So we want to keep this going, and we want to keep it going in the best possible way, and that is with truth and honesty and rigor and toughness. We have to. But the only way to do that is to stand tall in our rectitude. This is right, this is just, we believe in it. And the leaders who have responsibility for supporting our work must know how to reach out to people and talk to people about this. People have said to me when we started this at Brown, well, this is it, this is the end. We will not get donations. The alumni will be in an upheaval. Everything will come crashing down at Brown because we were doing this work. I had a $1.6 billion campaign. We had record applications for admission. Everything that you can imagine that would be good followed what we did. And so the idea that telling the truth is bad for business is not right. Because what people often expect from us is that we will be truthful, that we will not use subterfuge, that we will be strong in our views and uphold the right whenever we are called upon to adjudicate issues of this kind of importance. So I think, as I say, I don't have time to do the talk that I came with, but I'm happy to take questions and for as long as I can. I'm a little late, but.
So we're on your time. So, this isn't working, so we'll have to figure out. Why don't a few of you who want to ask a question, why don't you just come forward and we'll share the mic.
In your introduction, you talked you mentioned briefly that some of us who are interested in doing this work might, I think you were saying, inadvertently provide fodder to those who would undermine the work. And there was a warning there, and I was wondering if you could say a bit more about that, how you have seen that play out.
Well, there are lots of different ways it plays out. Now, some people say, well, my students used to ask me this all the time. Ruth, shouldn't you be angry? It's logical, right? When you think about what your forebears have been through and what even your grandparents and your parents have been through, they want to see anger. And at such a massive injustice. Well, I understand that. And I work hard not to give them that. And that's why I'm meeting with people who own the shop on this farm where my family was mistreated. Because if they have the ability to take that step, I have the ability to engage with them. Because the one thing I never do is I never hold back on what I think. And so if they're really ready to hear what I think, then that's an opportunity, right? And so I think accusations are not helpful. Anger is not helpful. As sad as we are, I think as academics, having the ability to control that is all important in order to keep the communication open, but and most importantly, to protect the ability of scholars who are going to be doing this work. Because here's what we know. If you've been following what's going on at Harvard, you know how angry people are. The very fact, before Claudine was, this is being recorded. Okay, I won't say that. It would not have mattered so much what unfolded at the hearings, because by virtue of her appointment and the way she looks and her existence was enough to mobilize certain people to remove her from office. How dare their university appoint such a person to the most powerful position in higher education? How dare they do that? They have not finished their work. They have found a way to unseat her. They are now working on the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Harvard through the same modus operandi. And they will not stop there. Because now you've got all of these problems in universities. You have people studying black stuff, okay? Instead of our stuff. We're getting it out of the textbooks. We're banning books so that this can't happen anymore. And if you think they're going to stop at banning books because there is a perspective taken in those books about the way certain cultures are treated, you certainly don't expect them to stop there. They've got to re-engineer universities entirely. Entirely. And if you start at Harvard, you've got a very good shot at going after every university if you're successful at Harvard. So here's what's happening already. Every presidential search in the country at a major university is going through the process of trying to figure out whether they dare appoint a person who is a woman or a person of color or anybody who is different from their ordinary image of a university president. Every institution is going through that process. Every institution is now trying to figure out whether or not they should begin to dismantle DEI, right? They may not be saying it that way, but if they're smart, they are hearing it already, and they are anticipating that this concern about DEI is going to come. They don't know in what form or from whom, probably public officials, but also possibly alumni who are feeling very empowered by people like Ackman and others to tackle this because it has been gnawing at them for a long time, and now they want to stop this work. So, what does that say about what our obligation is? Hew to the truth and the importance of the truth. If you do that, it doesn't matter what happens, because you can face down anybody when you have the responsibility to be honest and truthful and concerned about making sure that lies don't prevail. So that's what I would say is, as a university president and as someone who works across a lot of different areas, I always speak in general terms about this. The more granularity you use, the more problematic it becomes. Okay? And that's why at Brown, in order to preserve the ability of people to do this work, I always said, this is just about telling the truth. That's all it is. Are you saying that we should lie about our history? Right? And by the way, the Brown family descendants were still involved in Brown, serving on committees and so forth. And when we were doing this work, we had to face them first and say, we have to do this work, and explain why we have to do the work. So I think it's all in practicing the ways in which we can do this in a way that preserves the ability of people to know the truth. Yes?
My name is Pat Parker. I'm at UNC Chapel Hill, distinguished professor, the Rose W. Tyson Distinguished Professor. I say that because I want to thank you for being a role model for me, for my career, and for inspiring that. You weren't my first role model, but you're one of them. And I think my question is very specific, and it alludes to something you just talked about in terms of the Brown family as a part of your work. In that space between hearing the pushback broadly and making the decision to go forward, was there someone or any stakeholders that you considered part of, supporters, and I ask that in terms of the work we're doing, how do we build those allies? And I think right now the descendants of some of the folks whose names are on buildings that we're taking have been some of our greatest allies, but also another version of Board of Trustees, not the current version. But are there particular allies that help in this work that we might think about in terms of the practice of this work?
Well, keep in mind how long ago it was for us. There weren't any. There was widespread skepticism. And I have to say, I do believe it was because I was and am African American. I have often said that if it had been another Ivy League president who was white, that it would have played out very differently. Because it appears that as African Americans, we're not entitled to assert that we are owed the truth, apparently. So no, mostly there was opposition from people who were trying to protect me because they thought that my position was too important to risk on something like this. How sad is that? Okay, and they, I must say, correctly said, if you go down this path, there will not be another Ivy League president for a long time. And it did take 20 years. But the fact that other people are afraid should not deter our work if we believe in this mission. We just have to learn ways in which we can speak to this mission without polarizing even further the work that goes on. I learned as a junior person, fairly junior person, that action was far more important than talking a lot. And so I tend to say very little. And I learned this because when I was at Princeton, I thought, and it was very difficult at Princeton in those days. No black faculty, very hard for students. And so I thought, well, how do we change Princeton? But most importantly, how do we let them know how bereft of excellence they actually are? How do we do that? So I had a legal pad. I sat down and I listed all of the people that I thought could teach them that. And I went about recruiting them. And luckily, the number one on my list was Toni Morrison. When we started out, people said, well, I don't know, man, we don't really, she was at SUNY Albany. Well, we don't recruit from SUNY Albany. And then she didn't have a PhD. And then there were just so many reasons that was not really Princeton. She was not a fit for Princeton. Nevertheless, do a little cheating. This is well known, and so I don't apologize for it, but she was a very proud person and would not apply because she said, if they don't know my work, why should I want to be there? Okay. So I decided that I would type up her application and submit it. And well, you do what you do. And there's nothing dishonest about that other than the fact that I did it. I didn't claim anything other than, well, here's the material, and you can look at it and say, anyway. So we succeeded in recruiting her. And then, miraculously, shortly after she joined the faculty, she won the Pulitzer Prize. And then she won the Nobel Prize. And that changed everything in Princeton. Just that, okay? Because you can believe that people are unworthy if you don't know anything about Black culture, Black life, Black productivity. You can believe that. But when you see it in front of you, it changes your attitude. And so I have always believed that the work is important. It's what we do that must demonstrate the quality of this enterprise, frankly. And so today, if you go to Princeton, you will see the Toni Morrison building. And in the Toni Morrison building is one of the best Afro-American studies departments in the country. That's why. Okay? It's showing. So you don't have to back down, you know? And by the way, whenever Princeton drags me back to do something, I always tell them the story. The record is essential. Don't let people lie about history. Because if they do, you recreate the problem. And so I go around telling people the true story of how Princeton became the place that it is today. Not because they understood right away that needed to happen, but because people came there as scholars who showed them what it would be like. And there is some poetic justice here because Mackenzie Scott was Toni Morrison's student at Princeton. Mackenzie Scott is the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos. And when I went to Princeton to launch the building for Toni Morrison, I had dinner with Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie Scott. And then years later, I go to Prairie View, and what happens? Mackenzie Scott sends me $50 million for Prairie View. Okay? But why? Because she was educated by a person who understood this issue, and she learned it herself, okay, as a student. And that's why it's so important for policies in our institutions to be correctly shaped so that our students have access to the people who can teach them these things. And Mackenzie Scott has given more money to African American institutions than I think anybody to date. And her billions will continue to do that over time, all because of a little thing, right? Toni Morrison being her teacher. Isn't that poetic justice? I don't know.
All right, let's thank Dr. Simmons.
Oh, I see, okay. Oh, okay. I hope you heard all my instructions on what you're supposed to do. But be strong, okay? Hold to your views. Yeah. The truth is everything. Exactly. Okay.
That right there. That right there. You need to take those notes. Take that.
Sorry.
Organized. Thank you, brother.
She was a very proud person and would not apply because she said, if they don't know my work, why should I want to be there? Okay, so I decided that I would type up her application and submit it, and I did. Well, you do what you need to do, and there's nothing dishonest about that, other than the fact that I did it. I didn't claim anything other than, well, here's the material, and you can look at it and say, anyway. So we succeeded in recruiting her, and then miraculously, shortly after she joined the faculty, she won the Pulitzer Prize, and then she won the Nobel Prize, and that changed everything in Princeton. Just that, okay? Because you can believe that people are unworthy if you don't know anything about Black culture, Black life, Black productivity. You can believe that. But when you see it in front of you, it changes your attitude. And so I have always believed that the work is important. It's what we do that must demonstrate the quality of this enterprise, frankly. And so today, if you go to Princeton, you will see the Toni Morrison building. And in the Toni Morrison building is one of the best Afro-American Studies departments in the country. That's why, okay? It's showing. So you don't have to back down, you know? And by the way, whenever Princeton drags me back to do something, I was telling the story. The record is essential. Don't let people lie about history. Because if they do, you recreate the problem. And so I go around telling people the true story of how Princeton became the place that it is today. Not because they understood right away that needed to happen, but because people came there as scholars who showed them what it would be like. And there is some poetic justice here because Mackenzie Scott was Toni Morrison's student at Princeton. Mackenzie Scott is the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos. And when I went to Princeton to launch the building for Toni Morrison, I had dinner with Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie Scott. And then years later, I go to Prairie View, and what happens? Mackenzie Scott sends me $50 million for Prairie View. Okay, but why? Because she was educated by a person who understood this issue, and she learned it herself, okay, as a student. And that's why it's so important for policies in our institutions to be correctly shaped so that our students have access to the people who can teach them these things. And Mackenzie Scott has given more money to African American institutions than I think anybody to date. And her billions will continue to do that over time, all because of a little thing, right? Toni Morrison being her teacher. Isn't that poetic justice? Yeah. I don't know.
All right, let's thank Dr. Simmons.
And remember, man can shackle the hand, Man can shackle the feet, but only you can shackle the mind. The mind is free to travel wherever you dare to take it. Welcome to another edition of Count Time Podcast.